In this lecture segment, we'll finish our walkthrough of the HTML CSS tabbed control example. Let's build on the tabs v3.html file that resulted from the prior segment. Now, the final version of the control has a back row of tabs, the first row of tabs, slightly shifted left 2 pixels in fact, and down 8 pixels to make it look like overlapping file tabs. We need to adjust style for this, but we don't want to change the style of the second row, only the first. We could set up a second style for back tab rows, using it instead of the existing row style, but better design would be to keep using the row style for both rows and to add to only the back row a second style with the special tweaks for the back row. Once we put some JavaScript behind this, we'll be swapping the 2 rows of tabs so that whichever tab is active appears on the front row. Thus, different rows will be the back one at different times. The elegant way to handle this is to add a second style to the class property of whichever row is the back one, as shown in our HTML now here, where the class property is now back row for the first row, or the back row. And that brings us to question 1. Set up the style block for back row so that the back row is shifted as desired. And for now, don't worry about getting the back row behind the front one. We'll do that in a bit. Review CSS position concepts if needed. Coming back from a pause there, what we're going to want to do is set up a back row style like this with position relative and the left and the top adjusted by the 2 and 8 pixels. The position property allows several variations on the standard positioning rule, and the relative value allows you to tweak the normal position, as we discussed in an earlier in-lecture question. But when we actually check this out, the back row doesn't properly overlap the front one. Instead, it's in front of it. Oops. Thus. So, how do we fix that? We want it to appear behind the front one. Answer the question by looking up or reminding yourself of the z-index property. And so question 2, add another line to the style block for back row to assure that the back row appears behind the front row. And coming back from a pause, something like this would do fine. Z-index -1, and reloading that. There we go. The z-index property works rather like z-buffers in graphics software, with lower values representing distances further from the viewer. The higher valued z-index element appears in front of the lower valued one. Now, let's go on to add some pages to this. These tabs are expected to control the display of page content appearing below the tabs. So let's add a series of 6 page divs to go under our tab divs. Now, the plan here is to make only one of these visible at a time. We'll be looking at visibility selection a little later. For now, though, let's just get them placed under one another. So here's our HTML, and that's what I want to add. A bunch of page divs. But when we check it out, not so good. So what happened here? It looks like the first 2 pages got flowed onto the right of the tab rows. But we have clear both set for those tab rows. Why is that being ignored? And looking more closely, by the way, why is the flow happening only from the top of the second row instead of the top of the first? To figure this out, you need to find out the exact dimensions of those 2 tab rows. You know how to do this via the Chrome debug display. Do it now, and as a confirmation, the result will probably surprise and perhaps baffle you. This is a sign you got the right dimensions. So, coming back from a pause there, you have to highlight the thing you want to check, and then if you look at the computed style, you can see that the height is 0, and the width is the width of the entire page, in fact. Now, the width of the entire page is not too surprising, but the height of 0 pixels? What the heck is going on there? These divs contain 3 tab divs each. These row divs do. And each of the tab divs has a decent height. But the row divs themselves have a height of 0? Yep. Welcome to CSS. Parent-child relationships between divs are a structural relationship allowing group positioning, inheritance of style properties, etc. But unlike any well-designed UI system, a parent element in CSS and HTML does not necessarily graphically enclose its child elements. And yes, I just categorized HTML CSS as poorly designed by that statement. Now, predictably, there are workarounds for this. I'll ask you to come up with one, and I'll directly supply another, somewhat simpler one. So, question 4 here. Fix this problem by adding a 4th div to each of the tab rows, and by styling that final div in the right way. The styling question will need 2 properties. One to force this 4th div not to float to the left of the prior 3 tabs, and another to ensure that it's at least 1 pixel in height. The 4th div itself needs no content, just style. So coming back from what might have been a bit of a long pause there. Now, this was a bit challenging, so if you came up with something like this answer, there are several alternatives that do work without already being familiar with it. Well done. What's needed here is a div with a style of clear both and min height of 1 pix, about like this here. And I'm putting the div style straight into the div as a attribute, a style attribute here, just for convenience in this case. Now, the clear both forces the div not to float to the left, and the min height ensures that it occupies a tiny bit of screen real estate. The addition of this final div forces a break in the float flow, a sort of forced carriage return in CSS form, and it's called a clearfix. That keyword, clearfix, alone produces 58 million Google hits as of this writing, which should tell you there's a lot of discussion about it. Indeed, a perfect storm is created by the combination of CSS idiosyncrasies, browser variability, and the desire to encapsulate the clearfix into neat style packages instead of the rather hacked alternative of hand-adding extra divs all over the place. There are dozens of roughly comparable solutions posted. I've shown you one of the simplest. If you want a real CSS geekfest, just follow the top several of those 58 million Google hits. And let's confirm here briefly that the fix does in fact work. So refreshing based on that clearfix, our pages are now where they belong. And I will leave you with an even simpler solution that doesn't get as much press, but is almost always sufficient. Adding overflow hidden to the parent element style, in our case that's the row style, like that, forces the parent to graphically enclose its children because the overflow style property forces the parent element to be considered part of the graphical display by the browser's display engine. And this works just fine, with only a few rare exceptions involving cases where the child elements might legitimately need to extend beyond the parent boundaries and be scrolled over. So with that, we can remove our nasty clearfix hack and check to see if it's still working, and so it is. In fact, you may have noticed it jumped just a little bit there to get rid of that 1 pixel of extra space. Now, this clearfix issue offers a good design lesson, so let's digress a bit to talk about that. It's important to understand that the need for a clearfix is not a bug in CSS. The flow behavior in question is intentional. But almost by definition, if a standard engenders a huge discussion on complex ways to work around its weaknesses, then the standard is poorly designed. Often such weakness results from cultural issues rather than simple error. CSS and HTML were designed with textual layout in mind, and they follow reasoning more characteristic of a printer, a graphic artist, or a typographer, despite being increasingly used as a software UI design medium. Indeed, much of the hassle in web design, and arguably billions of dollars in needless geeky effort, can be traced to taking what was originally a simple stateless document sharing standard, HTML and HTTP, and turning it into a generalized distributed computing medium, which it was never really intended to do. There were dozens of thoughtful, well-designed standards for distributed software systems created in the 80s and the 90s, but none took hold. Instead, the most sophisticated intellectual artifact in civilized history, which is the Internet and the World Wide Web, is built on a lightweight document sharing standard never really meant for the job. It's unfortunately true that technical standards are often dictated by historical accident and market feedback loops rather than by economic and engineering efficiency. So, end of diatribe there, and let's go on to finishing up this page setup we've got. Question 5. Our pages should be larger than just a single text line. Make use of the page style, which you may notice is embedded in each of those divs. Make use of that page style to arrange for pages to have a height of 300 pixels, a solid 2-pixel border, and a background color of very light gray. And coming back from a pause, this is all pretty straightforward by now. The style needed is height 300px, border solid 2px, and background color, let's go for £EEE. About like that. Now, checking out the result, we do find that the pages are all going to show after one another. There's page 1, 2, 3, 4. So we need to put them on top of one another and show just one of them. And to do this, we need to look into CSS features for adjusting visibility. We'll want to make just one of the 6 pages visible at a time. And while we're at it, we should make one of the tabs look selected, perhaps by giving it a darker blue background. There are several ways we could organize this, but one of the more elegant is to have 2 new styles, call them selected tab and selected page, and to add these to the currently selected tab and page respectively, sort of like this. Assuming page or tab 2 is selected, we'll have selected tab like that. So question 6, create the selected tab style and then add it to your tab 2 to show that tab as selected. Coming back from a pause, the selected style tab or tab style is fairly straightforward. Let's stick it up here. Thus, with a background color of BBF, a slightly darker blue. And we have attached it to the tab down here. As we know, checking it out, we find out that nothing happens. Okay, so why? What did I do wrong? The problem is that I need to put the selected tab style after the tab style in the style section. When 2 styles are competing on a given property, as tab and selected tab do for the background color on tab 2, there's a complex set of rules to decide which one has precedence. You saw a little of this with the body style block overruling the user agent or browser style for the margin earlier on. Between the otherwise equal styles tab and selected tab, the last one listed has the final word. By the way, the order in which they appear in the divs class property down below here does not matter. It's not used to determine precedence because it would be hard to change that throughout a complex page with many divs, while the order in the style block appears just once. So let's confirm that that's going to work now. And reload our page, and there's our dark blue tab. Now, the full set of rules for style disambiguation is called the style cascade, thus the name cascading style sheets. A hardcore CSS developer has it memorized, but it's enough for you to know that it exists and where to find it. The bibliography references include complete descriptions of the cascade. So we arrive at question 7. Let's now modify page and add a style selected page to make only page 2 visible. And coming back from a pause there, what we're going to need to do is modify page by putting in display none. This will make pages automatically by default invisible, and then put in selected page and give that display block. The display mode is normally block, which signifies the standard text flow-like visible layout that we've been dealing with. A display mode of none makes the element invisible, and importantly, makes it take no space. Thus, the other 5 pages will not only be invisible, they do not take up room around page 2, which we will now make the only visible one. Checking that. We can see that everybody else has gone away except for page 2. By the way, if you want to make an element invisible but still occupy the space it would have, you use visibility hidden instead. So now our final step is to make all this into a tabbed control. Now, right now our pages have a fixed width, 300 pixels, but in general we'd want the tabbed control to fit within the width of whatever parent, for instance block 1, it's within. And we might want a background color behind the entire assembly of tabs and pages. To do this, we'll create a general top-level div to contain our tab control, and we'll give it a style of tab block, thus. And then down here, closing tag, and a bit of indentation, and there we are. Now, this new div will be the only child of block 1, as you can see. Block 1 will determine the desired width, and the tab block div will take on that width and supply a background. So question 8, add a style for block 1 so that its width is 500 pixels. Do not add any properties to block 1 itself. That's the challenge. In other words, don't add a class property to block 1. Well, coming back from a pause, the way you could accomplish that is by adding a style with the selector pound block 1, and then of course width 500 px. The style selector pound block 1 identifies the element with the ID block 1. Remember that pound prefixed selectors identify elements, HTML elements, with a particular ID. Okay, so question 9 then. Please add a tab block style for our new parent div of the entire tabbed control. Make it take on the full width of its parent without assuming any fixed value for that width. Give it a background color of, say, very light blue. Coming back from a pause there. What we need is a width of 100% and a background color of, let's say, EEF. Now recall that width can be specified in many ways, and one of them is as a percentage of your parent's width. So that's what we're doing here. And let's save that off and see how it works. If we refresh it now, got a problem. The width was established correctly, and we got that background color we wanted, but the back row of tabs is now obscured. Why? And how can we fix that? Coming back from a pause there, this is a z-index problem. Z-index is 0 by default, and the back row has a z-index of -1, which makes it go underneath the tab block parent. So I guess a good fix here would be to have the tab block be given a z-index that goes even lower, from -2. Okay, but if we try that, we're going to find out it still doesn't work. This is actually the right idea, but it lacks one more setting, one more property. And this last little challenge is a good example of the research sometimes necessary to get CSS right. So I will pose it as our last question, number 11. What's the missing property to get the z-index -2 to work properly for the tab block style? And coming back from that pause, you need position relative, because z-index is only relevant for relatively positioned elements and is otherwise ignored. And that finally wraps up our tab control. In the next topic, we'll add JavaScript event handling to the control to make it live.